So welcome everyone to this first talk of the first full day of our Rohatsu 2022 sesshin or retreat. Here at Mountain Cloud, in the cloud, as Henry said, one here. I'd like to start today with a reflection, an expression of appreciation, a deep acknowledgement of the life of Sister Elaine MacInnes Roshi, who died a week ago today at the age of 98. Her wake, she's Roman Catholic, her wake will be the night of December 7th, and celebration of life on December 8th, Bodhi Day. So fitting. I can't imagine her being happier. Remarkable woman, remarkable life. Zen master, teacher to John Gaynor, who was Henry's teacher, teacher to many Sambo Zen students and now teachers. A dear friend of Ruben Habito Roshi, our root teacher. Actually, now just looking down, I have to say, this stick was given from Yamada Kon Roshi to Sister Elaine. And Sister Elaine, many years later, gave it to Ruben, who many years later, in a very quiet, almost sheepish way, gave it to me. Thank you, Sister Elaine. So she was a musician, a very fine violinist, studied at a conservatory in Canada, where she was from, New Brunswick, and then 2 years at Juilliard. Very high quality. During World War II, during this era, she went back after Juilliard to Calgary to play in the orchestra, teach at the university, the conservatory there. And that happened to be a center for British airmen who were serving in the war. And indeed, she fell in love with a young British man named Jack. And they carried on their lives in correspondence, and at one time he flew a mission in bad weather and fog, and his plane flew straight into the side of a mountain. Some years later, in 1953, Elaine entered a Roman Catholic order. She became a postulant on December 8th, at the time not realizing any significance about that date. 8 years later, she was sent to Japan by her order to teach music and oversee a new cultural center. I think she was the first Catholic nun to sort of be sent to Japan. And there she met Father Hugo LaSalle and asked him to be her teacher. And he said, "I can't teach you." Very humble man who sat and practiced, I believe, for more than 20 years before having an experience sort of recognized. So though he was deep into practice, he said, "I can't teach you." And he suggested a master, a man that he knew. And Elaine said, no, I'd like to study with a woman. And so she found her way to Inkoji Rinzai Temple in Kyoto. And for 8 years, she lived with the nuns, practicing daily, doing a monthly sesshin Zen intensive in the Rinzai manner, which was you get up at 3 in the morning and you're to be dressed in your place at 3:05, according to her. After those 8 years, she began to study with Yamada Kon Roshi. And she received Dharma transmission in I think it's 80, after 20 years of practice. So she describes her first meeting with a Zen master. She said it took 20 minutes for him to prepare and serve a cup of tea, all in silence. And then when the tea was prepared, he opened up the conversation knowing that she was a Roman Catholic nun, very devout woman. And he asked her, how do you pray? And then he said, what do you do with the body? She said, well, that's not important. And this master said, oh, yes, it's very important. And then he told her about Zen. Elaine said in an interview that she had a hard boundary, that Kon Roshi had to break it open. And the way he approached her, I mean, of course, this moo, but it morphed with his guidance into, where is God? And he asked her, is God in you? Reminds me of his asking his son, Masamichi, when he was growing up, where are you? And Masamichi goes, well, I'm right here. Well, that's your heart. Oh, I'm right here. That's your legs. Well, I'm right here. That's your head. For Elaine, is God in you? Yes. And she sort of started to point to her heart and then realized that didn't hold up. It was too small. And she was just sort of looking for this. And he said, how about the tip of your little finger? And he rang the bell. She left Dokusan, went back to the Zendo and sat on her cushion, and suddenly, whew, that was it. That barrier gone, dissolved. Ken show, she said, to see your own nature. There's a lovely film where she's being interviewed about Zen, and she says, Zen is a process that starts in silence. It gives us a technique to become one with the breath, being the breath, the body in a specific position. Put all powers of perception into being the breath. She said it's subtle, especially challenging for Westerners. So then we offer this tool of counting the breath. She said a still mind does not indulge in ruminating about past or future, resting in the present moment. She said in the beginning, breathing moves, but over time, it gradually moves less and less. and finally settles in its home. She said, inner wounds are healed, fears and anxieties dissolve, we become of service to others. I remember Ryon Roshi saying, up to a certain point in his practice, he sat for himself, for clarity, and something shifted. And from that moment on, he sat for the whole world. To become of service to others. This serving Dharma. She said she was getting rid of biases and prejudices she had had for years, and spoke about being a better citizen of the world, and about the great unknowable, this great unknowable, being thoroughly immersed in that. Sin is universal, she said, open to anyone, a wonderful way to bring about change and deep transformation. After those years in Japan, her order sent her to the Philippines during the worst of the Marcos years, as she put it. And there she met a prisoner who had been picked up on the street and tortured. And he asked her to go to the prison. So she went. She went every Friday, all day. And she set up a zendo, they allowed her, and said, I taught real Zen to them. Within 3 months, those men had changed. And she exclaims, there is no separation between I and you. This is real freedom. The prisoners, these unfree men, had tried everything. And they were asking for a new life, for a new change. In this film, one prisoner is quoted as saying, as long as I can remember, I've had this hurt inside. I can't get away from it. Sometimes I cut or burn myself so the pain will be in a different place and on the outside. After only 4 days of meditating, he said, meditating for the first time in my life, I see a tiny spark of something that I can like. The Zen Master James Ford, Boundless Way teacher, interviewed Elaine and said her work for restorative justice is worthy of books. The stories of it may be typical of her, but astonishing to most of the rest of us. Seems like he had about a 4-hour interview with her, so generous. He said, I came away in awe. Her religion has no room for separation. It is all about love. A love at the deepest possible place. She manifests it moment by moment. She's manifesting it now. What Dogen and Ford and others call the intimate way. Intimate to you, intimate beyond words, this way of silent immediacy, this language of silence. No word can touch it. But there is one word that conveys it, unleashes it. One word that can shine in and through us like a sun with stone melting power. We can all say it. Mo. Here's case one of the Mumonkan, called Joshu's dog. A monk asked Joshu in all earnestness, "Does a dog have Buddha nature or not?" Joshu said, "Mo." This mu, no, not having, nothing. I feel so fortunate in this rare way. It doesn't happen very often to be an English speaker who doesn't need to translate this. So some do, some use no, but no with no opposite. But there's just nothing like that. Some opposition. In Joshu's not having, there's nothing like having. Nothing at all to have. Joshu says mu, and he's not elaborating, and he's certainly not explaining. Nothing but mu. Stands alone, swallows everything, gives rise to everything. So we come up to this question, what is mu? But it's not a question to answer. It's a question to become. Become what you are. Ruben Habito Roshi often speaks of the 0 point, this reality of who we truly are, as that I am. But the am, just this am, it subsumes everything. That I is just engulfed in am. Just am. Where just means nothing but, just sitting, just listening, just standing, walking, laughing, crying. I think this is one, or the key reason why shikantaza, that method of sitting, that just sitting, is sort of the highest level of practice. There's no one doing anything. Sitting. This mu, sitting. Nothing outside it and nothing there. Years ago, when I did this ceremony and received this Rohatsu, one of our Dharma brothers, Migaku Sato Roshi, wrote a little verse with the name that I had been given. And I keep it in the box with the Rohatsu. He wrote, In nothing at allness exists endlessly everything. Whatever you pick up, that's it. All of it. That bite of food, that plate you're rinsing, this endlessly everything, as vast and wide as this whole chiliocosm, this billions of galaxies, and as tiny as the tiniest speck of dust. All of it. I've mentioned before that in his translation of the case, this Joshu's dog, Yamada Koan Roshi renders mu with an exclamation point. I don't know that anybody else does that. It's not so common. But, what is it that compels that gesture, this that massive, tiny, explosive device? I think Henry said that years ago. This little atomic koan, that kernel, just what is mu? It's you. It's Sister Elaine. It's Shakyamuni Buddha. And it's Joshu. This famous master, 8th to 9th century, lived 120 years. We know the story. In the season of commemoration, it seemed so fitting to bring Joshu alongside Shakyamuni Buddha and us right here, eyebrow to eyebrow. He's 18 years old, studying with Nansen, and has this first deep awakening experience. And then 40 years of studying with his master. Nansen dies, Joshu mourns, he goes on pilgrimage. 20 years, sort of checking himself, honing his sense, well, you could say his eye, this world, this clarity, this translucence, this dynamism, this simplicity. And finally, he's 80, and he settles down to teach in this meager temple called Kanonji, had different names, but named for Kanon Kanzeon Avalokiteshvara. Very few disciples. And the key thing about Joshu, Sister Elaine calls it his temperament. Unlike Rinzai or Unman or Toksan, these masters that were so fervent and powerful and shouting and, whacking, Joshu's soft-spoken, like Dogen, like Shakyamuni Buddha, Elaine says. When he speaks, it's like this sort of golden light comes from his lips. All that's left of Joshu's temple now is the stupa that was built when he died to honor him. The lower half is left of the original. But that place is so alive. Rather like this room right now. Or this cloud right now. There's that passage that's sort of become iconic already after Thich Nhat Hanh died. He told his, many, many followers, build a stupa if you must. He knew they needed to. But know that I am not in there. And I'm not out here either. Thai said, I am the peace in your steps, the ease in your breath. What is that peace? That ease. Only now. All of it now. Nothing but Mu. There's a lovely student, a member of Mountain Cloud, who has recently moved back to India with his family, and just sent a quick email, very brief, not long ago, describing an experience. He wrote, during my morning walk, this is somebody who's earnestly sitting with Mu. During my morning walk, I had this sudden experience of the moment. From past to future to present, every moment coalesced in that moment. I could see the sun filter through the leaves. I could barely move, walk, and felt a lot of emotion come to the surface. Every step felt heavy. He titled his email, Frozen. One whole body cannot take a step. So what are you doing walking in Kinhin? There is nothing outside of this. And what is this? Melt into Mu. I was just recently at Domicilium, this beautiful kindred Sambo Zen meditation center and hospice outside of Munich. And for many years, Kubota Roshi, a former abbot of Sambo Zen, taught there. And I used to go to sesshin. I would travel over there. And his teaching at the time was just so simple. Delete, delete, delete. If only we could just press that button. Like pressing a button on the computer and all the letters disappear. The whole document disappears. Maybe the whole computer just delete. When everything is gone, what remains? Around that same time, I started studying with Ryon Roshi, and he had this slightly different nuance to teaching. Look into what you see. Just look into it so honestly, so nakedly, so intimately, until what you don't see disappears. What remains? And then there's that famous teaching by Koan Roshi the moment there is nothing but mu. Nothing but mu. Nothing. Mu will appear. One student had a glimpse of this and said, it's impossible for anything to be inadequate. Another was sitting with this beautiful koan from Joshu, Wash Your Bowls, and described an experience of sinking through the layers of concepts, layer after layer, to absolute purity, spotless. And then the student added, impossible to corrupt. This deep, deep peace. I just met a couple days ago with another student who is, member of Mountain Cloud, taking a class with Hogan Bay's Roshi, who's co-abbot of Great Val, out in Oregon. And Hogan Bay's, the class is on time, but he led this group of students who are all practitioners in an exercise where they just sat, and he invited them to close their eyes and to just quietly say what you see. What do you see? And, gradually, the students said that one by one, the students very quietly began to just share a bit of their experience. And one of them said, I see waving pixels. And Hogan Bay said, look more deeply. Look deeply into the visual field. Look more closely. And I'm just there, online with this student, hearing this, sharing this. By then our eyes closed. So we're doing this together. You can see absolutely nothing. Let mu melt into mu. Let mu see. What happens if we see with the eyes of mu? In all that I was taking in about Sister Elaine in the last week, I came across an anecdote that she wrote in her book, The Flowing Bridge. In the beginning, she does this teisho on mu, and she includes this scene of being in sesshin with koan Roshi. And something had happened, and the room that students are invited to go into right after Dokusan to make notes had been switched. And so she went to Dokusan, and she went to the room where she thought she was supposed to go, but she apparently was confused, and she's in there starting to write her notes, and she looks up, and there's this little opening in the rice paper wall, and she was looking right at koan Roshi, who's sitting in the Dokusan room. And she couldn't see the disciple sitting in front of him, but she could hear everything. And she said, koan Roshi's sitting there just vigorously rubbing his eyes and his face like he did apparently when he was tired. And this student facing him is yelling, "I am working on mu!" And Koan Roshi's rubbing his eyes in his face. And the student, it really sounds more urgent in Japanese. "I am working on mu!" And finally, Koan Roshi puts his hands down and looks up and says, "What did you say?" It reminds me of Henry's invitation to do as little as possible. Do as little as possible. As Dogen puts it, you're already a person of thusness. Why worry? You are that. You are that. I can hear Ryon Roshi saying, mu is the only thing in the whole universe. Simply mu. This one existence. Thoroughgoing. How to find it? Just be what you are. He would say, just become the fact itself. You are that. That is the incredible grace of this practice. There's nothing to get. You are that. Mumon earnestly, single-mindedly practiced with mu for 6 years. I love that image of one day standing near the Dharma hall. He heard the sound of the drum signaling the midday meal, like you might hear the Han calling us back to sitting. Just one strike, and Mumon suddenly awakened. He wrote, "A peal of thunder under the bright blue sky. The multitude of living beings on earth have opened their eyes." Can you feel the joy in that? Out of nowhere, not a cloud in the sky, suddenly one thunderclap. And everything dissolved. One sound, one gesture, one moment, one here. You vanish. And everything comes rushing in. It may sound frightening, understandably. People approach this and say, I sense fear, I feel afraid. But all that gets lost is the artifice of separation. You gain, in a sense. I mean, you don't really gain it, but it's the whole world. It's you. Everywhere you turn. There's no telling how this will happen or how many times. The shift. When it does, it is recognizable. Utterly so. Somehow, you know, you see. And we get glimpses along the way, silence, this deep, absorbed, undivided silence. That's the medium. And time, the only time, this now. right where we are. So, based on his experience, Mumon leaves that rather long and very powerful commentary, a sort of roadmap to practice. You know, it's worth reading, though it's not a prescription in the sense of this is how it has to be. It's not like that. It's his experience. Recently, a student emailed, just reached out, someone who does regularly joins us OL and Mountain Cloud events, and just was pushing back on this line from Mumon's commentary: you must completely extinguish all thoughts of the ordinary mind. And the student said, I tried so long to stop thinking. It doesn't work. I'm not so sure that's what he's saying. Not stop thinking, but we can stop sticking to thought. And then it stops being a distraction. Thought actually can become transparent, translucent, beautiful, just like sound, like sensation, and very still. There's a piece by Melissa Miosen-Blacker where she unpacks this commentary. I just want to share a little bit of it, of her comment on the commentary. Mumon is not asking us to stop having thoughts, but to stop following them. She goes on, to stop following thoughts resembles Dogen's advice, this famous verse. To study the self is to forget the self. She writes, when we forget the self, we stop putting a construction we call the self at the center of our lives. Similarly, when we watch the pattern of thoughts that arise moment after moment, we can follow them to their origins, which turn out to be nothing more than fantasies, constructions of the mind. I think you can go even farther than that, but she goes on, seeing through these fantasies and constructions, we discover a world beyond thought, in which rain is only rain, not words or stories about rain. We come back to our true life, our true self. The subtle realization that Mumon mentions here is nothing more than this recognition of our naked, unborn self, alive to this moment, alive to the world as it is, not as we think or construct it to be. This smell, this taste, this touch, sight, sound, with no description in the way, she writes, this life in this moment, and we along with it, perfect and complete. We get glimpses, tastes, intimations of this as it is world. But Blacker says those glimpses are abandoned in the demands of what she calls consensual reality. Right, wrong, good, bad, near, far, inside, outside, a grid of judgment, everything separate. Just one little more bit from Blacker. How are we to understand something that is not the opposite of anything? Mu is a single response to this dualism. Can we find a place where this one thing doesn't exist. This mu. Finally, she adds, it can feel painful or annoying because we must actually feel the stuckness, which is nothing more than the impossibility of understanding what is real. That stuckness is nothing more than the impossibility of understanding what is real with the dualistic mind. It's not about understanding, making sense of it. Taste and see. Maimon says, how? How do we do it? Exhaust every ounce of energy you have in doing it. I read that and ask, how do we reconcile exhausting everything, with doing as little as possible? Actually, sesshin lights the way. Entrust yourself. Let every effort be exhausted. Let it go. And arrive at the inexhaustible wellspring of this one here. So I just want to close with this little offering that came my way last week, from a friend in Hawaii who's sitting with the Diamond Sangha group there. And these are just a few short vows for daily life that Robert Aiken Roshi composed. When I sit with my friends in Zazen, I vow with all beings to touch and receive and convey the mind of river and stars. Facing my imminent death, I vow with all beings to go with the natural process, at peace with whatever comes. When beset by personal problems, I vow with all beings to settle myself in Zazen and trust the path to come clear. When the point of my koan eludes me, I vow with all beings to remember how linnets appear. It's in Hawaii. When I fill their feeder and wait. And this last one. When fear seems overwhelming, I vow with all beings to walk through this ancient valley, breathing mu right to the end. The ancient valley right here. Or as Maimon puts it, the perfect manifestation, the absolute command. Long sitting, time to stand up. Thank you for listening, and thank you for this shared practice.